Welcome to Stitt Happens, the podcast where we explore the future of energy, from solar power and battery storage to the changing policies that shape how Arkansas keeps the lights on. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and today we're kicking off our very first episode with someone who's been leading the solar movement in Arkansas for decades. David Stitt of the Stitt Group and Stitt Solar. He's here to break down what's happening with rising energy costs, where the opportunities lie, and why, even after 40 years in business, he believes the real energy revolution is just beginning. David, how are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing great, and I'm excited about this. I'll just say to start, it was probably a year ago we did our first meeting, a little interview session, and it was great. And I enjoyed the conversation, and I enjoyed your understanding of this industry and awareness of it. And as we kept thinking about ways to communicate with the people that we're connected with, and those people that are interested in knowing more about this just seemed like such a great format to have a longer conversation about what's happening. And so I'm super excited about this. It's a first episode, and hopefully the first of many.
Yeah, I hope the same. And I was honored to have you on my podcast. I am Northwest Arkansas, and to share your message, because it's actually one that I think it really does matter to everyone. I mean, as long as you turn on lights in your home or in your office building or in the warehouse that you own or where you sleep at night, it's important to understand how the rising cost of utilities impacts our daily life. And you've been dealing with that for a number of years. And so I had the privilege of watching an amazing program that you were part of down in Fort Smith, which we will put in the show notes. We'll put a link to that program. But you've been a part of this conversation for a long time. I want to start with what's happening right now, just so that we can frame this conversation for the listener, for someone that might be watching this video, trying to figure out how to put a dent in their utility costs. But recently, SWEPCO proposed rate increases, and I'd be curious to know, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Rate increases historically have been, not every year, but maybe every other year, or, somewhat sporadic. And I wouldn't say they were rubber stamped, like they weren't just always approved. There's usually some conversation and some debate between the utilities and PSC, Public Service Commission, before approval. And the utilities are always working with their mandate to provide affordable, reliable, and safe energy for their customers. And so they are a regulated monopoly. And there's a climate in the utility world and the energy world right now where, we have a grid that's just been neglected for so long. And I was at a conference in Little Rock and talking to experts about infrastructure and transmission lines and the things that are growing in a growing economy, and smartphones, computers. I mean, the electrification of America needs it. And the utilities are undeniably, not even to bring artificial intelligence into this conversation, which I'm sure we'll touch on, they're trying to figure out how do we handle this? How do we build out a system? We're all experiencing the cost of food, the cost of all kinds of things in our lives going up. And some of the infrastructure improvements that the utilities have to make are going to cost money. Now, the question is, how much, and where's their choice for energy going to come from? There's a big debate right now with SWEPCO, and that utilities by law can earn a return on their investment. And in some cases, and there's actually some litigation happening right now with SWEPCO about they are also supposed to supply, and I'm not an expert on the exact law, but clean sources of energy, the most affordable choices when possible. Well, they have chosen to burn coal in Siloam Springs when they very well could have purchased wind or cleaner sources of energy for less money, but it would have impacted their bottom line. And that is a topic that is flying in conflict with rate increases. And so that's really touched a nerve with ratepayers to say, why are the ratepayers footing the bill for all this when maybe the utility wasn't a good steward of their resources and how they were handling the situation? So it feels like anytime there's a conversation about energy and utilities, the price topic comes up and everyone's feeling it.
Yeah.
It's just omnipresent anymore.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a really good point, and it always seems like the little guy ends up footing the bill with these, right? I mean, across the board. I mean, we could look at that for anything. And I will say that one of my observations as an outsider looking in is that all utilities are not created equal. So some of the challenges that you might experience with SWEPCO might not be the same that you might experience with Ozarks Electric or some others. So I know that there are some differences there, because I'm sure there's some people watching this saying, well, I don't have those same problems. But I mean, you're looking at it from a totally different perspective, both as a creator of solutions to harness utilities, but then also as a user of those utilities in the same vein. One of the things that you brought up in your talk was the factor of, beyond just cost, is reliability. Is that power going to be there when I need it?
Yeah. Yeah, you almost can't turn on the TV anymore without hearing news about the concern of an ice storm, weather events, even in different parts of the country, brownouts and blackouts. So reliability is a big thing. And although I think the utilities are trying really hard, and I think in most cases are doing a pretty good job of that, there's just a load or a demand for the energy that's greater than it's been, and that's just going to be harder and harder to provide that reliability. And we used to say, specifically with solar or batteries or backup power, it used to be people said, well, I don't want my food in my refrigerator to spoil. But that dynamic's changed. Now it's your food, but it's also your communication and your TV and your Wi-Fi and charging your phones and all that. So we become more and more dependent on sources of communication, and we need energy and electricity to power those things. So that's definitely a topic. We're hearing that all the time.
Yeah. Well, you said specifically that solar and battery systems are no longer, as you said, luxury items, but they're risk management tools. I mean, you got a lot of people that work from home, so of course they need Wi-Fi. They need lights while they're working. So these are all things that we take for granted when the power grid is working just fine. But on the off chance that there is a problem or an issue, you certainly run into a challenge there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's worth saying, and I might take a little bit of a hard left here for a second. I think there have been people in our industry, when I say that, clean energy, solar, wind, battery storage, who have vilified the utility companies. And I'm not doing that. I think there's undeniably some work that has to happen there, because that industry has got to evolve, change, and grow, and recognize that there's technologies that the consumer, whether that's a school district, a business, a homeowner, have at their disposal now. And the integration of clean sources of energy, distributed generation, where we're producing it on the rooftop or on the property of the consumer, is there that was not there 10 years ago. And the utilities have to recognize that. And we all got to dance together. So I am certainly a proponent of the evolution and the change and the growth of how our industry relates to the utilities. There's no doubt the utilities have to recognize the integration with this side of the meter too. We desperately need each other. It's undeniable. And I think that the solar industry one of our greatest assets is we're really good at figuring things out, and we've become very nimble over the years. But it's an emerging technology and an emerging relationship with the customer and the utility that's never been there before.
Yeah. Well, and of course, when you think of that whole emerging relationship, it's like who has control? Who ultimately has control over the situation? For the longest time, the utility had all the control, they held all the cards. But I mean, in your industry and what we're seeing now in terms of the options that are available to the average consumer, they are starting to gain a measure of control that they didn't have.
Yeah.
And you used a terrific analogy, which when I heard it, I was like, oh, I love this. But you said in the talk that you said about it's kind of like being a water skier pulled behind a boat. Can you explain what you meant by that when you kind of shared that analogy about the water skier and the boat?
Yeah. 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 I think using visuals and trying to help our customers and really the general public understand what's happening is important. And so, what does it mean to be producing clean energy? The point of that analogy is you're either driving the boat and you have control of where we're going, meaning we're going to go up and down the lake, or we're going to go faster, we're going to go slower, or we're just going to stop. And that's great if you're driving the boat. But if you're on the end of the rope, you are going wherever you're pulled and you have zero control over anything. And again, I think that's the dynamic that's really changing. And a little bit of a side note to that, in many cases, like for example, SWEPCO's the coal plant in Siloam Springs, or Gentry, I guess it is, they are shipping coal 1,000 miles from where it was mined, 1,000 miles, burning it. And most people would agree that somewhere between, 60 to 70, maybe even 80% of the potential energy is lost by the time it gets to the plug. Yeah. And yet we're sitting here in a age where we can produce energy and store energy I can produce it. In fact, the building I'm in, we produce 90+% of our energy that's consumed in this building a year and store it in a battery. Why would we ship coal from halfway across the country when I can produce it on my rooftop, consume it in the building? It's so much more efficient. So again, back to your water skiing question, that is the way it's always been done. We've always been on the end of the ski rope. We've never, as a society, driven the boat as it relates to utilities. And now the customer has an opportunity to sit in the driver's seat, drive the boat, not be on the end of the ski rope.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even, and I know one thing to think about is for those that are listening to this is that even small scale solar can start to shift that balance of power back to the homeowner. And I don't think that should be lost on people, because I know sometimes when people hear this conversation about solar, they're like, oh, great, I've got to put 1,000 panels on my roof. And right. It's not like that anymore for a number of reasons. But, people don't have to go off the grid to start or take part in this kind of revolution. You can start with a few panels or a battery, and you're already reducing risk. Can you kind of speak to that just so people have a better understanding about what this involves?
Yeah, definitely. If talking about the rate increase, whatever, it's kind of in negotiations right now, what the final number will be for that rate increase. But the proposal is a little over 27%. If you are getting 100% of your electricity from the grid and you're a SWEPCO customer, or, let's don't be surprised when other utilities follow, because once one utility needs a rate increase, others are going to need too. Like it's the same environment they all operate in. So, but if you're a SWEPCO ratepayer, then you're 100% exposed to that 27+% increase. If it goes up, you're going to pay it. I mean, interestingly, people will pay their utilities before they will pay other things. They will actually cut medicine, food. They will do other things because they have to have the lights on, they have to have their heat and their cool and all that. So you're 100% exposed to that risk. The second you start to offset or you start to produce energy from another source that you have control over, you're moving closer and closer to the boat, so to speak. Yeah, and you're 100% right. Everyone, and I get it, people come to us and say, I want to get 100% of my energy from the sun. Well, we all do. But we also, when we climb a mountain, we don't just leap to the summit, right? We go to base camp, and from base camp we go up to the next camp, and we have to ease our way into it. But you're spot on. Someone could say, "Hey, give me 20% of my energy from the sun and a small battery, or maybe it's no battery. Let me dip my toe in the water." And you do it over time, and there's a lot of factors in this. So to be clear, we can get most people, and the battery's kind of the X factor a little bit because sometimes it adjusts what the cost structure is. But my point is, you can pretty much, if you get $50 a month into solar, you're probably going to save about that on your electric bill. So it's kind of a swap of money, but that energy bill doesn't go up with solar and batteries. It's constant over time. So again, back to the risk mitigation, you're just offsetting the potential risk of rising energy costs.
Yeah. Well, and I love that analogy that you just gave about kind of like that consistent improvement, right? I know the Japanese talk about the Kaizen approach of just a little bit better each day. You just make small improvements here, and before you know it, all of a sudden 50% of your utility costs are things that you are taking care of as opposed to having somebody else take care of them for you. I know you said every kilowatt generated independently gives the end user more control over costs and reliability.
Yes, and one other one, no one likes to pay more taxes than they need to. And so if you have a $200 electric bill, you're going to pay tax on $200.
Yeah.
If you have a $20 electric bill, you're going to pay tax on $20.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we take this analogy and play it out a little further, the evolution from maybe 5 panels on your rooftop or a school district, and I always want to remind people that if you have an electric meter, this conversation matters because every meter is a local electric meter. Sometimes we think about, these massive solar arrays and we think about big systems. At the end of the day, every local school, household, a repair shop, heat and air man, they all have a utility meter. Therefore, this conversation matters. So whether it's 5 panels on your business or your home, and it grows, and there comes a point, we've seen this evolution, and frankly, it's one of the more gratifying things we see with our customers, is they kind of get the bug, and they do the 5, and then they do the 10, and then they get to 0. And then they get a little extra, and they start to produce what we call net zero. That's when you're zero utility bill. They go to net zero plus. And now they start saying, hey, you know what? I can take care of my car or my e-bike. And they start to decarbonize their whole life. And decarbonization has a little bit of a political firestorm feel to it. But for people that want to do it, it's a great, very satisfying thing people can do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people talk about their carbon footprint, right? And in doing this, following this model that you're describing, helps you to reduce that carbon footprint significantly. Mm-hmm. So it makes all the difference in the world. I'd be curious to know, you brought this up, what mixture is our business clients versus residential for the work that you've done? And for those that are uninitiated, you're second generation in this business. So your parents started the Stitt Group almost 40 years ago. That's been 2+ generations. And so you guys have seen it all. And I'm sure over the years it has changed. But at this current date and time, as we're recording this first episode of Stitt Happens, what would you say is the mix between business and residential?
No, it's a super interesting question. individual systems, it's more in numbers residential. The commercial systems tend to be larger.
Yeah.
And it goes back a little bit to the point about everyone's got a meter. People tend to think about their own personal finances different than their work finances.
Yeah.
They go, hey, we got a $400 utility bill this month. Well, that's coming right out of your back pocket. And you feel the pain of giving a large amount of money, and that has an impact, and that spurs people to action. And so that is inevitably, there's probably more drive to get it done for the sake of a homeowner. However, the systems for businesses and nonprofits, churches are getting to be a big deal because they feel this need to be good stewards of the planet. And there's a lot of commitment among faith-based organizations, nonprofits. Nonprofits are seeing this real need to say, we're always looking for money, for funding opportunities, and how do we reduce our overhead costs? Well, that's a gift, by a donor that keeps giving.
Yeah.
It takes care, it's a large sum of money to build maybe a very large solar array, but it gives back every single month for 30 plus years. So it tends to be by numbers more residential. By volume, it's probably almost the same because it's commercial and those jobs tend to be bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and over the course of several episodes, we're going to get into the nuances of, solar paneling and batteries and all aspects of it. People are going to hear from installers. They're going to hear from some of the providers of some of the products that you sell. So there will be a lot of information that people will get. This isn't going to be our first rodeo. This is just an introduction into this whole community and this whole business model, if you think of it that way. I want to talk, before we land this plane on this episode, I do want to talk a little bit about policy. You've said that one of the biggest barriers in Arkansas isn't technology, it's regulation. Can you maybe talk about what's standing in the way of more people adopting solar power, solar energy?
No, I thought you'd never ask. Yeah. It is frustrating because there are things in this world we just can't change.
Yeah.
And yet there's some things that we can and we should. And Arkansas went from having one of the most favorable, what we call net metering laws in the country, meaning if you bought kilowatt hour at a certain rate, you could sell it at the same rate between, as it goes back and forth across the meter from utility to home to utility. And, some people, I think nationally that trend started to reverse a little bit. But the problem here in Arkansas is we went from having probably one of the better, if not the best in the country, to, without question, the worst, if not, or one of the worst. And I say that because a lot of states went what we call wholesale retail. You buy at full retail, and then when you produce an electron and send it back across the meter, you sell it back at the wholesale rate. That was what most states went to. Well, in Arkansas, with all our wisdom, we went to what's called a voided cost. And a voided cost, that calculation was even rewritten. So it is, I'm going to say round figures, it was 2.58 cents per kilowatt hour. And, most people, if you include taxes and delivery and all these different fees that we have, it's somewhere between 12 to 15 cents. So it wasn't a wholesale retail. It was buy retail and sell it almost nothing. Yeah. And so people said, it doesn't make sense for me to send electrons back across the meter to the utility. So what's ironically happening is the customer is keeping them. They're putting them in a battery, and they're even setting their battery to zero export, meaning they're keeping it. And even the system will what we call curtail, or when there's sun out and the battery's full, it'll actually shut itself down and keep them, or it won't produce. Well, in a climate where we need more and more and more energy and more electrons, to think that we have these systems going in all over the state and this country where we're not sending anything back to the utility is counterintuitive. So that's the problem. And I do believe, again, in my earlier comments, I think that we all need each other. I think there can be some common ground and some rethinking of that, where we go back and say, hey, I think that one solar array of 10 panels isn't going to change the world, but 1,000 solar arrays of 10 or 50 or panels will. And so that's the problem. And I don't fault our legislature whatsoever. It's a complicated conversation about what does energy cost. Certainly the utilities are lobbying for what's most important to them. Solar industry is lobbying for what's most important to them. But what we have to do is look out for what the ratepayer should have choice. They should be able to choose and say, hey, I want to buy from the utility. I don't want solar. But some are going to say, I do want clean energy. And to kind of put a bow on this, I absolutely believe that the thing that's omnipresent and like spreading like wildfire is consumers in our world today want choice. Yeah. I mean, who would have ever thought you would jump in a car, not a cab, with someone else, call it an Uber and go around town, or go stay in someone else's house in San Francisco when you go visit the world, or be a Razorback today and play for Alabama next year. The world wants choice, and ratepayers want choice too.
Yeah, and that's so eloquently put. You're absolutely right, and I know that, again, the current policies really discouraged any shared energy benefits, and certainly people listening to this need to be thinking about, if there are opportunities that do present themselves, as I'm sure they do from time to time, you should really let your local representative know. If things come up to the state house that you can vote on that can impact this issue, you certainly should make your vote and your preference known to your local representatives. Because honestly, everyone could win if the grid and the private market work together. And there are examples of this in other parts of the country with these virtual power plants. I'd love for you maybe just to briefly touch on what some of these real world examples in California and Colorado and some places on the East Coast where communities cooperate with utilities. There's that word there, cooperation with utilities, to balance demand.
Oh yeah. Virtual power plants, such an amazing, again, if someone would have even 5 years ago said, hey, we can build virtual power plants and have batteries in all these homes and businesses around a market and produce clean energy on the rooftop, store it, and then during peak demand, allow the utility to tap into that resource and pull back out of that battery. And again, 2 batteries isn't going to do it. But if a market has 1,000 batteries or 10,000 batteries or 100,000 batteries, it makes a huge difference. And I think the premise that makes this, that people have to understand, the electric grid is built to handle what we call peak demand. Mm-hmm. At night, days like today, 75 degrees, sunshine, light breezes, the energy demands are not that high, not compared to 99 degrees in the middle of summer and everyone's got their air conditioner units running and the peak demand goes crazy. So we build electrical utility grids for peak demand. Well, this virtual power plant idea allows the utility to subsidize the homeowners or the business owners to add batteries, with the understanding and the agreement that on certain periods of peak demand, they can literally go in and pull energy from that battery to support the grid. And the customer gets a benefit. They agree to let the utility pull that back. And there's situations in California where, because it's a market-driven concept, that there's periods of time where the battery, the energy stored in that battery is so valuable during potential brownout and blackout periods, they pay a very, very high premium. Now, again, we're not California, and that's not going to happen overnight. But this idea that we can deploy lots of batteries in a very, very short time and for a lot less money than building a new coal plant, heaven forbid, micronuclear, gas. If you want to build a gas plant, it's 8 years to get a gas turbine right now. We could be installing batteries in markets around this country, you know, tomorrow. I mean, we're already doing it today. So that's a real world opportunity. And the other thing, going back to your point about resiliency and a reliable grid, if that single source, it's kind of like airports. When you're flying to Chicago, if there's a thunderstorm in Chicago, the whole airline industry gets disrupted. Well, the same thing happens if the power plant goes down. The whole grid gets disrupted. Well, if you have a virtual power plant, you have distributed generation. It's much more reliable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where, it is a vision for the future that that's why programs like this are important, because it's an exchange of ideas. It's a way for people to just become aware that, if we can get utilities partnering with consumers, not necessarily competing against them, it's a win-win for everyone. And I think
Agreed.
the biggest win is the consumer, right? The end user, the little guy, us, that's out there just trying to make it every day. And utility expenses can typically be a real high percentage of your monthly income. And so, every little bit helps. And that's why conversations like these are really, really so important.
One quick thing to throw on that, and I say this may sound derogatory, and I'm saying it, and so people take it in the idea that I'm saying it. We have a saying around here: you can't outproduce your stupidity. Meaning,
Right.
efficiency is a big deal. Doing things around your house that reduce your consumption, like we don't believe that everyone should just outproduce their high utility bill. And when I say stupidity, it's the meaning that we have to recognize that if we're wasting energy, we have, big holes in our house, and we have bad windows, or we have just an inefficient home. Sure, it costs money to do that too, but efficiency is a part. You should produce some of your energy on site as clean energy, but you can reduce how much you consume, which actually is one of the best investments you can make.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. All right, we want to move on. I want to talk about this coming marketplace of energy, and it was something you kind of made this comparison, and you did allude to it earlier in this conversation, that the future of energy, what it might look like in terms of the way we choose streaming services or ride shares. What do you mean by that in terms of just what the marketplace of energy could be for us, even here in Arkansas?
Yeah. You know, the word deregulation has a lot of bad connotations, and so it's probably not the right word. But there's a gentleman that spoke, and I can't think of his name. We might put it in the notes if I can. I'll remember the guy's name. But anyway, we talked about figuring out a way, and other utilities have done this, but figure out how to get the private market and regulated monopolies to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And I say to work together, for regulated monopolies to have a component to them of choice. And that probably leaves a lot to the imagination. So my point is this: if we always sit back and say the regulated monopoly will always be what it is, and we're not going to change, it will always be a very stoic, very cumbersome process. Like, I understand why why monopolies exist, but there needs to be a free market component to that. I think free market's probably a better word than what I said earlier, but free market meaning if I go in the marketplace and I say, okay, I'm going to get 50% of my energy from clean sources, I call it solar and battery on my house, but I want to choose a utility. I want a choice. I want to go to a utility and say, I want all my energy to come from wind in Western Oklahoma. I don't want to buy coal. Let the market speak and say, I am not going to buy dirty fossil fuels. Well, if you have that, even going back to our net metering conversation, If I look at, and there are states that have done this, and some have not gone well, and some have gone better, and I think people have learned a lot. But if I go out in the marketplace and say, hey, this utility X says I can get, they will actually net meter, they will allow me to sell my energy at, maybe it's not retail, but it's a higher rate than the other guy. And they have a portfolio that is 80% clean. They have some fossil fuel, but it's by and large. And, there's a portfolio. I am not an expert on that. I will admit it openly, but I know that there are states and utilities around the country that are doing that. And there's some success in that because it allows the customer to have that choice. So you may have solar, you may have battery, but then also to pick and choose a utility that gives you a portfolio of energy that is important to you, I think is the future. I think people want choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think they really do. And you're absolutely right that there's coming a day and a time when you will be able to, just like we get onto DoorDash and pick and choose from the menus what we want to eat that night or what we want to order. There's going to be a time and a place where that's going to be administered in the utility space, and it is going to make a difference for the end user, the homeowner, the small business owner that's utilizing utilities in that manner. And I mean, and the nice thing about it is you get to see that the evolution up front and personal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this free market, again, is part of what customers really want. They really want to know that they have choice, and that is going to play out. I think it's undeniable. And again, the technology is going to be such that whether it's community solar or microgrids, there's just a lot of stuff that's coming that's going to allow that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I know, and I don't want to overwhelm our audience. I know that there is a lot to take in here, and we're really still kind of talking at a surface level, and we're going to dig deeper in several of these episodes. But, I want to, for the homeowner or business owner listening who kind of feels overwhelmed, not necessarily by this conversation, but just by the concept of making a major change, especially around your utilities. What's one step that they can take today after listening to this episode that could help them move them in the direction of making a decision or determining if this is the right path to take?
Oh, you know what? I love that question for two reasons. One, I think people do want to be empowered. I think they want to know and they want actionable steps. And this may sound odd. It's probably not very fun. But one of the things overwhelmingly that we feel and hear from our customers is frustration about their utility bill. They really don't understand what a rider is, what a fuel delivery charge is, what they're paying tax on, what's a volumetric charge versus a fixed flat fee. And so taking a minute, I mean, the levelized billing was arguably one of the greatest, it's kind of smoke and mirrors, frankly, on the electric bill, because people go, well, my bill's $129 a month. But they don't realize that a whole bunch of months it was $42. And some months it was a budgeting thing. It was $200. But it forced people to become disconnected with what they were spending. They didn't understand it. They just know that it's auto pay, it's on the 10th of the month, and it's $129.
Yeah.
So the best thing I think people could do is go home, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, put your utility bill on the counter, and understand, call your utility and say, tell me what all these charges are. What do they mean? Which ones are variable? Which ones are fixed? And that people will start to, and I actually believe, yes, there are people that need to be on levelized billing because they do need to budget for that, but they do need to understand the difference in how their utility bill fluctuates from month to month and year to year. And I'm surprised, and I'm part of this too. When times I get bills out and I go, I don't even know what all this stuff means. So I think it's educating yourself on what you're paying, why you're paying, and what does 27.3% rate increase mean to you? And that, knowledge is power. It's kind of a play on the words. Knowledge is power. But you become knowledgeable and you learn things, and then you make better decisions.
Well, and I think that's important. I know that, that we're kind of just at the beginning of this conversation. And, one of the things that is important for programs like this is just the simple understanding for the consumer, for anybody watching this, is that the industry that David is in is changing rapidly. And you
Hmm.
just need to be aware that one day it's going to be one thing, the next day it's going to be something else. And you really do need somebody on your side, like David, like his team at Stitt Solar and the Stitt Group, that can kind of help you navigate, even if you just get basic information. I mean, their website has an amazing FAQ section, and they go through a lot of information that you just want to try to make sense of your current situation before you even start spending money. What do I do? How do I get control of my energy situation? And David has given us a couple of the blueprints to just start with, but that's the easiest thing, is that you have to, knowledge is power, and you have to get that information so that you are an informed consumer, because an informed consumer knows what they need, as opposed to just kind of going by the variances in the wind and whoever has the best marketing program at that moment.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way, that's my take on it. But this has really been good, David, and I think that you provided a little bit of hope to the consumer, and maybe even given them a clarion call to start to think about what they need to do next as it pertains to their own utility situation. And we're going to get into some really great conversations as this program evolves. But David, thank you so much. I really appreciate you allowing us to start the journey this way with Stitt Happens. In future episodes, we'll dive into the practical side of all that we've discussed today, from how to design your system and understand ROI, or return on investment, to what policies are changing and how you can make your home or business more resilient. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and visit stittsolar.com/Stitt Happens for show notes, links, and ways to get involved in Arkansas's clean energy future. David, we really appreciate having you on, and we will have you back again because this is your show. So we look forward to further discussions, and I appreciate you and Laura and your amazing team there at the Stitt Group and Stitt Solar. And I think that our audience is really going to benefit from tuning in to all of the advice and guidance and information that you're providing in a format that is easily consumed. And so thanks so much for joining me today, and we'll see you back here very soon with another new episode of Stitt Happens.
Yeah. Thank you again. It's so much fun. It's a great conversation. You're always a pleasure to sit and talk with, and always inquisitive, and we're excited about what's to come. So appreciate you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's all we have for you guys this time, folks. We will see you soon on another episode of Stitt Happens. I'm Randy Wilburn, your host, and we'll see you later. Take care.